All right. Today we are fortunate enough to be joined by Dr. Cynthia McKinney. Dr. McKinney has served 6 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing her districts and constituents in Georgia. In 2008, she was the Green Party nominee for President of the United States, and she is recognized as an international peace and human rights activist. She's been noted for inconvenient truth-telling about the U.S. war machine, and she was actually held for 7 days in an Israeli prison after attempting to enter Gaza by sea, and has traveled to Libya during US bombing and witnessed crimes against humanity committed against that country's people. In addition to Libya, she has traveled to Cuba, Syria, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, and I'm sure more. She is author or editor of 3 Clarity Press books, and she has written one book, Ain't Nothing Like Freedom, and edited The Illegal War in Libya, and the 2018 book, How the US Creates Shithole Countries. Her latest book is entitled When China Sneezes, From the Coronavirus Lockdown to the Global Politico-Economic Crisis. She holds a BA from the University of Southern California, a Master's of Arts in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and a PhD from Antioch University. So, Dr. McKinney, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show and for finding me.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it doesn't take much digging to see your input and what's going on today. So let me start with this if we can. Cynthia, you have a track record of spotting differences between what people are told by media, in some cases by the government, and differences between those pieces of information and facts that would dispute that public narrative. So I think people would be fascinated to learn how that began and how it's evolved during your life.
Wow, that's a kind of a tough question, because to explore myself and to find out where that came from. Well, I'm a child of the civil rights movement, and I've seen the power of positive change. I have seen that change is possible through politics, and that personal change is possible through introspection. I have seen that in my own life. I have seen it around me. I have seen it in my Southern context. So let's see here. I have lived my life hearing what other people had to say about circumstances, communities, or whatever. And because of my background, my schooling, my mom's focus on, making sure that I went to good schools and that those schools taught me how to think, I guess you could say that it just became a part of me. So I could look at and see what people were saying, and I could look at my own context and compare what they were saying to my own context. I began to do that, and I'm not alone in that, quite frankly, because I was doing a bicycle ride across America, Bike for Peace. This was back in 2010. And right after my father died. And my mom said I was kind of trying to run away. Well, anyway, I was in the middle of nowhere with the other bikers. There were 6 of us, I think, all together. And we're in the middle of the desert in Nevada. A woman overhears us discussing politics or whatever, and she joined the conversation. She was the hostess, and she joined our conversation. And I said, how are you so smart? How do you get it? And you're in the middle of nowhere. She was in the middle of the desert. And you guess what she told me? She said, I listen to what they say on television, and then I compare that to my life. And I guess I did the same thing and not realizing it. Then I enrolled in my PhD program which is leadership and change at Antioch University. And it was perfectly suited for me at that time. And so after having served in the Congress, and I got a chance to meet a lot of people while I was there. And one of my congressional staffers, John Judge, who is very well known, he's a co-founder of the Committee on Political Assassination. So this is a group of people who came together after the public assassination of President Kennedy, and that it changed their lives. And so he was one of them. He was so, how can I say, affected by what had happened, what we all, they witnessed, and they knew. They were a little older than me, so they knew what they were witnessing. But I lived through, as going to Catholic schools, I lived through that whole debate about whether or not it was right for the United States to have a Catholic president. That was a debate that touched me personally. Then when he was killed, that also touched me personally. The civil rights movement touched me personally. I was involved in protests, sit-ins in local hotels that resulted in the passage of the Civil Rights Act, 1964 Civil Rights Act, and then got involved in other sort of political matters that resulted in the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So I was sort of like the little kid in the whirlwind of all of this, observing and soaking it in like a sponge. So then the time comes, I'm in the PhD program, and I've gone through all of this, and John Judge tells me, you need to have Peter Dale Scott on your dissertation committee. And so then, of course, I said, absolutely. Peter Dale Scott is the Berkeley emeritus professor who popularized the use of the term deep state in the United States, in reference to these phenomena that take place that you really don't know where they come from or who's doing it, who's carrying it out. But our public state, those people whom we elect, give voice to this and give a justification or rationalization for what has happened. So anyway, Peter Dale Scott said yes, he would join my dissertation committee. And then when I was trying to convince my dissertation chairperson that Peter Dale Scott was the person that I needed as my external advisor, he said, why? And I said, because I want to hone the Peter Dale Scott methodology. And my dissertation chairman said, well, what the heck, he didn't say heck, is the Peter Dale Scott methodology. So we got Peter Dale Scott on the phone, and he said, I look at what's not there. Now, when I was in the Congress, I would tell my staff, you have to see the invisible, hear the unspoken, and read the unwritten. It's the only way you can fully understand the environment and the context that you're operating in. Because when you're sort of politics is, people say it's like a lot of smoke and mirrors. Well, you've got to be able to find the substance within or despite the smoke and the mirrors. And that's what I was trying to teach my staff to do. And I think that's what we did. And so it stems from a desire to understand everything within your context informationally so that you can make good decisions. You can't make good decisions if you don't have correct information. And so I've been inquisitive, I've been curious all of my life, and I ask these questions, and it's those questions that have gotten me into trouble. I've gotten into trouble because I'm trying to touch the smoke and the mirrors of politics.
Yep, that makes sense. in your time in Congress, and it was substantial. I mean, 12 years in Congress is a good time to be able to view the dynamics and so forth. What were your observations about the other representatives and their sensitivities, their intents, perhaps, and so forth? If you can speak to that a bit. Many people today are reporting concerns about people acting in ways that seem inconsistent with what they've said their intents were, and so forth, and it breeds concern. So I'd like, if you could, just speak to that a bit.
It should breed concern, because I've witnessed members of Congress actually laugh at their constituents for being so dumb. And what do I mean when I say that? What I mean is that they can go to their district and they can say one thing, and then they can vote another way up in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, what's the difference between the elected representative and the average person who is supposed to be represented by that representative? Well, it's the power of the vote. It also is the power of the position. There are certain powers that go along with the position of any elected office. And so now, but in terms of the Congress, what we're there for, what we were there, what I was there for, is the power of that vote. When you go there and you're making public policy, yes, you have a bully pulpit, but the function is the vote. And so if they can vote one way and they can tell you something else, some rationalization, or just, not address the reason that they cast a vote a certain way at all, or took a walk. Tulsi Gabbard took walks. And I didn't think, you're not there to take a walk. Why you are there is to make the tough decisions, to make the tough calls. You are elected to be a leader of sorts. And at some points, you have to balance being a leader versus being a representative, because you ultimately also have to be a representative of the people who elect you. But you also are looked to for leadership. And part of that leadership is moral and ethical leadership, principled leadership. And that's what people are missing now.
I have heard that, consistently across the folks we've spoken to. So that when we talk about leadership, obviously these last year and a half, 2 years has been a unique and troubling time for many because of the pandemic. And some that we've looked upon to provide guidance and facts and leadership have been heavily questioned over the last few months regarding their role in this. So I'm sure we'll talk about your writings regarding both the pandemic and also the human condition, if you will, the human biome.
Mm-hmm.
What, in general, as we begin this part of the discussion, what are your observations around how in the heck did this get started? Where might it have come from? And what kind of dynamics, what kind of motivations would have led us here?
Well, of course, the leadership studies query exactly these kinds of questions. What are the motivations of leaders, and what are the motivations, quite frankly, also of followers, and what kind of leaders are appropriate, and is leadership an innate skill that we all have and just have to develop, or is this something that, are there certain attributes that individuals have because they're born with them or whatever? I think that we all have leadership potential. And so therefore, the best leaders are the ones who cultivate that leadership potential in others. So having said that, that means that when you see something wrong, you have to I have to say something about it. Now, there are leadership styles or leadership types that are satisfied with the status quo. And basically, you have transformational leaders and you have transactional leaders. Okay, so according to James McGregor Burns, there are basically two types of leadership: transformational leadership and transactional leadership. So, transformational leadership is that kind of leadership that seeks to transform an environment and also transform individuals. So, for example, teachers are transformational leaders because they transform their students from one sort of state of knowledge to, hopefully, if they're good teachers, to a higher state of knowledge. And then, of course, you have these transactional leaders who are not really interested in changing anybody. They're not interested in changing themselves. They are attracted to the perks of the position. And it seems that we settle for transactional leaders who are not going to change anything. They're not going to change the status quo. They're not going to try and improve the well-being of anybody except maybe themselves. And we confuse the transactional leader with the transformational leader. And this was what I saw taking place during the Barack Obama period, where I was trying to inform people that Barack Obama is a transactional leader. He's not transformational in the sense that he was being portrayed as the next Abraham Lincoln, the next Theodore Roosevelt, the next Franklin Roosevelt, the next JFK. He was even portrayed as the next MLK and the next, he was everybody.
Yeah.
And yet, of course, now we know that the war machine, as I call it, was cranking in high gear. He was not someone who was a man of peace, and he was a man of the U.S. deep state, whatever that means. I have a specific definition for what that means. And so, when I saw people crying as they were in Germany, they were literally crying when he went to Germany trying to do both a Reagan and a JFK redux. People were crying because they thought the United States had turned the page to a new and different kind of country. And it just wasn't the case. And but anyway, so the people continually seem to get tricked and fooled and bamboozled by this kind of behavior, when what they really want is just someone who loves this country, who loves them, and who is grounded in values and ethics.
Well, it's fascinating you would focus on the, the person's, the leader's intent. So many things after how many years now? 6, 7 years we've been able to observe after the fact, and what many had hoped for turned out to be very much not the case.
That's right.
As you said.
That's right. That's right. And so, John Mearsheimer wrote the book Why Leaders Lie. And I think it's very incomplete in its treatment of that particular topic. However, the important thing that it acknowledges is that leaders lie. And that's what I think we, the people, have to begin to acknowledge, is that our leaders have lied to us. And not have they just lied to us one time, they have lied to us over and over and over again.
I think that's part of what many are spotting now, isn't it? With I keep hearing the phrase, the pieces don't fit. So when we are told one thing by a supposed leader, and yet the facts surrounding it just don't fit very well. A few examples, Pfizer having claimed that they got testing done and a certain level of effectivity for the things that they're producing. And yet when you ask for the data that backs that all up, we'll be happy to. It'll take about 50 years for us to get it released to you. And these things just don't seem to fit very well. The other thing is,
No,
you'll I think, speaking to the transformational versus transactional leadership focus, when you see, for example, Rand Paul on the floor of the Senate, questioning very directly statements that have been made by Dr. Fauci and others. This tends to, in my mind, perhaps make people think about, well, if that doesn't fit, or if this has been an area we've been not told the truth, perhaps, what else, where else has this occurred? Because it probably didn't happen in a vacuum. So,
well, that's a good thing, I think, that people are beginning to question where else has this happened. Because my personal experience has been that everything touched by the United States government has been a lie, which makes me question even, why we bother to have a government. But that's a whole different issue. It's a different matter for a different time. But like I started out mentioning John Judge, who was so shaken by the murder of our President Kennedy that it transformed his whole life, and he dedicated his entire life. You have people like if we use that same example, we have people like Dr. Cyril Wecht. I interviewed him for my dissertation, and Dr. Cyril Wecht demonstrated what we would call leadership on the line, because there are some people who are just willing to put their leadership on the line for the truth. And Cyril Wecht was one of them. He did the autopsy, the Kennedy restudy of the Kennedy autopsy, and he was faced with, okay, if I tell the truth, this is going to be the end of my career as I know it. If I lie, everything will be just fine. I will be in line with the other liars who have covered up what happened on that fateful day in Dallas, Texas. But Cyril Wecht decided to tell the truth. Now, when you say that you're going to drain the swamp, how do you think it's best to drain the swamp? Do you want to have people who have intimate knowledge of the swamp, people who understand the swamp around you, or do you want to merely go with people who have been in the swamp before? So when President Trump said that candidate Trump at that time, said that he wanted to drain the swamp, I think there was a huge sort of a volume of support there, because by that time, people understood that Washington, D.C. and the various state capitals around the country were swamps, and they needed to be drained. Now, in my opinion, the way you drain the swamp is you get someone who's intimately aware of the swamp, who knows how to navigate the swamp, maybe who almost drowned in the swamp. Maybe the swamp almost got the better of them, but they emerged from that experience with their ethics and their values and their principles intact. Do I have examples? Yes, I do. One example is General Taguba. General Taguba, after the whole hue and cry came out, we had a very valiant soldier who exposed what was happening at Abu Ghraib. Now, I was in the Congress at the time, and so I dug a little deeper into what was actually going on in Abu Ghraib. But we had a soldier who understood his own values, and he said, this is wrong. And it was wrong. That is not the United States of America that I want to be a part of, that I want my tax dollars to support. So General Taguba was charged with doing the investigation of what exactly was going on with Abu Ghraib. And what he said to himself is, I can tell the truth and I'm stuck, or I can lie and I'll still be stuck. So what did he do? He told the truth. Of course, that he was stuck because that was the end of his career. So he suffered, but his ethics, his principles, and his values remained intact. So what did I do? Since President Trump is a Twitter person, I tweeted out myself, hire General Taguba, since you seem enamored of generals, which I thought was inappropriate because that's the whole point of civilian control of the polity is you don't want the generals to be in charge. But since he was doing that, then here's a general who did the right thing. He understood the swamp. He navigated the swamp. He suffered as a result of maintaining his principles while he was in the swamp. Those are the kinds of people who are, I believe, perfectly poised to drain the swamp.
That it's a fascinating view of that. Do you believe that more of those kinds of people are emerging as we go through, I'll call it this strange, set of challenges? They continue to get deeper. Do you see more of those people coming to the front to take a role?
There was one doctor, an emergency room doctor practicing in New York. He was the very first one. He was young too. And he said putting patients on the ventilator is not the appropriate treatment. We've been given a protocol that's killing our patients. He was the first one to speak up. Then you had other doctors join in and say, this protocol is not working. That whole process, I think, because doctors have basically allowed the AMA to be their lobbyist, and then they go about their business and they do other things. But you see, doctors allow their profession to be taken over by those people in the middle that President Trump talked about. And so the doctor is no longer in charge of his or her relationship with the patient. Mm-hmm. And while I was in the Congress, I tried to sort of grab this, get a hold of this, to try and stop it in a way so that doctors could maintain that primacy, that primary relationship with their patients. So it has been interesting to see doctors who had their autonomy taken away from them, and then they just became followers of a protocol. They weren't allowed to think. And so if the protocol said you take this pill 4 times a day, then that's what they told their patients. You take the pill 4 times a day. And it didn't really matter if it was efficacious or not.
Mhm.
It was what the protocol was, and the system had been so bad that the doctors weren't policing themselves, and so you had the attorneys. So then you got tort reform, and so the whole system became just a mess.
It seems
And
as
that
if,
go ahead.
go ahead, please.
And that relationship was basically destroyed. So now what happened was not only was relationship destroyed, but the doctor's ability to think was destroyed. In fact, there was one study that I used to cite to my students when I was teaching about who actually can save more people. Is it um, the medical doctor? Is it the scientist doctor, the researcher doctor? Is it the EMT? And it turned out that from this study that it wasn't the medical doctor, because medical doctors don't think, they follow the protocol, right? And they're not allowed to think. The EMT that's in that ambulance has to try everything, even those things that are out of the box.
Mhm.
The EMT is the one who is going to save a life. And it turns out that from this study, the EMTs are the ones that are, really saving lives. So that tells us that you cannot put the human intellect in a box. You've got to be able to examine the context of the issue or problem that you're trying to resolve. And sometimes that context is within the human body, our bodies. So so the process of the coming out of these doctors and scientists who have been sort of in this ivory tower, or in this lab room, or in this emergency room. The clinicians, on the other hand, were the ones who were saying, hey, wait a minute, this is actually working and this is not. And that's how you had the emergence of the frontline doctors, who were like transformational, because they brought to the attention of anyone who would care to listen or dare to listen that the protocol that had been written by and approved by FDA and NIH and all of the other writers of protocols, whoever they might be, those bureaucrats, were not right. And that has been wonderful to see, because now doctors who might not have all of the answers, but they are searching. And one thing they have been trained to think, they just haven't done it for a while. And now they're actually thinking, and they're finding solutions, and they're understanding that this is not a medical issue. This is a political issue. And they are now becoming political.
Isn't that interesting? So this is
Yes.
this would be a great place to segue into your work, culminating in your book, When China Sneezes. So nobody can describe it probably as well as you. So could you sort of characterize the book and a little bit of content and the way it works, and then talk to us about some of your findings or some of your observations in putting the book together.
Okay, well, so the drums of war were beating. This is 2019. And the United States was being quite belligerent toward China and accusing China of mistreating its Muslim community. And as a result of that, I like to go places, and I like to see for myself. I like to study and learn and acquire information. And so I said, I need to go to China. I can't go by myself. So I found people who were willing to pay their own way. It turned out that there were 20 of us, 2 from the United Kingdom and 18 from the United States. And they were willing to travel to China and immerse themselves in Muslim China, you could say, and see if what we were being told by the media, the mockingbird press, if we were being told the truth. And that's what we did. So we went there after Christmas and we stayed there through the new year and into close to mid-January. Well, we learned a lot, but that was also the time when things were happening in China that we were not aware of. And we're looking at the news every night. We were looking at the English language news. We were immersed in, sort of China, although we were trying, out during the day, sightseeing and trying to talk to Muslims, either Han Muslims and non-Han Muslims, because we ended up in Xinjiang, which is the Uyghur province, the Uyghur controlled province.
Yep.
And so we did that and we intended to produce a book. But a few short days after we returned to the US, China locked down, the US locked down, Italy locked down, something the world had never seen before was taking place. And of course, it superseded anything that we had thought about writing in a book. So I said, okay, I need to do a book. We just came from China, need to do a book. And so then I sought who are people, it wasn't confined to PhDs, but I wanted people who had some expertise. So who are the people who can contribute to this book? So I came up with a proposal, sent it to Clarity Press. They accepted the proposal. And then I got busy trying to find people who would contribute chapters, one who were familiar with China. So there was some kind of familiarity there that could cut through the propaganda. Yep. People, and as it turns out, I have some people who actually live in China, some who are not Chinese, but who live there and who can just kind of stand back and take a more objective perspective. And I also have, as a contributor, a person I met on the airplane and in a totally different country, who happened to be, I shouldn't say too much, but let's put it this way, a kind of influential person in China. And he contributed, he or she contributed anonymously. So that was really good. And then when Italy shut down, I said, oh, I got to find somebody in Italy. So I got Claudio Peretti, who wrote a fabulous chapter about Italy. And so then the book came together. Basically, what we started out with, what is a coronavirus, so we wanted to make it very elementary. But this is not a topic that is elementary at all, because what I immediately, and it's that thing that Peter Dale Scott taught me, is the thing that I was trying to teach my congressional staffers before I even met Peter Dale Scott. It's that thing of this context, just trying to penetrate more and more and more and more. What's the context? And in my opinion, everything, if it doesn't add up, it's got a political answer. And so what has happened in the past? What I say in the introduction that I wrote to the book is that, buckle your seatbelt, because you're getting ready to go for a ride. And the ride is going to take you where you never dared to think before. Our bloodstream has become somebody's battlefield. That's where we are now. And so the political dimension, we started out dealing with the medical dimension or the biological dimension, but we had to end up with the political dimension. What does this all mean? What is the narrative, the sense making that we can make out of this series of events?
That's right. When you hear, when you learn, as Rand Paul was able to extract in the hearings, that some of what we would expect, I think, as Americans, to be studies in our best interests, turn out to be something perhaps contributing to the problem in the first place. Fascinating, but incredibly scary.
It is scary. It is scary. But how are you going to solve the problem if you don't face the problem? And that's the issue. Is, you know, we all have, like, you know, personal issues. Like, so I, as an individual, I'm dealing with the changes in my own life that I'm experiencing. Change from being congresswoman to former congresswoman, being changed from being a student to mother to wife to, you know, change to being a young person to a middle-aged person to an older person. And all of this change I'm absorbing, and we all have to absorb, but you can't absorb it if you don't face it. And so we have to face what has happened. When I used to give speeches, and I would say, along with everybody else, we're going to take our country back. But now, if you don't have an idea of what the problem is with the country, how in the world are you going to take it back? And from whom will you take it? To whom did you give it? These are questions that we have to, and so I have to, before we finish, I have to mention this book. Barbarians Inside the Gate, although it's not working. So I have to mention this book, Barbarians Inside the Gate, written by Colonel Don de Grandpré. And I understand that it's impossible to take our country back with just economics, because we've been beaten economically. We can't take our country back politically because we've been beaten politically. This is a military, we have to approach it as a military problem. And that's why I'm reading a military man who has analyzed this problem and has come up with a solution in 4 volumes. So I'm only reading the first one, and I've got 3 more to go.
Well, these are not simple problems, so I would expect they'll take a substantial amount of information to cover, right? So obviously lots to be concerned about. We began with talking about people sort of getting a sense of things don't fit. So there, many would use the term awakening to a different way of looking at things. Yeah. As we look forward, you know, there's lots of people, I think almost every day, kind of beginning to go through that process. Are there things that you think are important priorities in next steps, sort of for everybody? What should we be looking at? What should we be concentrating on? What kinds of things can we learn and in many cases perhaps do to work in a positive direction, given some of these challenges we're awakening to?
I have, first of all, how can I say this, except that the people you look up to as your leaders are fallible, and many of them have made huge mistakes. Those mistakes are being covered up, and those individuals cannot be true to you because of the mistakes that they have made. Now, when we say that we're going to take our country back, We cannot, how can I say this, is that you can't say, okay, this person or this person or this person is going to save us, because they may not be in a position to save you. And the people whom you trust may not be trustworthy at all. Therefore, the first place to start is inside yourself, to understand yourself. And what is it about you that needs to change in order for you to be able to save this country? That's the first thing. Second thing to understand is that the people who are paraded in front of you, who appear on Sunday morning news shows, are there for a reason, and it may not be for you. So those whom you have grown to trust, maybe you need to start distrusting or mistrusting now. Thirdly, I'm watching as certain individuals who have been projected to the public as heroes. I'm watching, well, they were never heroes for me, because I have that uncanny sense about investigating a person and not just looking at them. Look at, who their friends are and what are their goals and aims in life. What have they done? What are their accomplishments? And have they suffered? Because like my first campaign theme was warriors don't wear medals, they wear scars. So who's left standing? I have a t-shirt that says it matters where you stand, about Lavoy Finicum, who was shot down in the street just like our president was. And so who's left standing when there's a battle that has been engaged? Those who are left standing, do they have scars or are they wearing medals? That tells me a lot about what side they were on. So you got to look at these people. I've been watching this unfold about what's going on with Lynn Wood right now. I know a lot of the people who are involved in this. I know of some other individuals who are involved in his persecution. His persecution tells me I need to be paying attention to him. I've been persecuted. He's being persecuted right now. Lynn Wood is telling the truth. I trust Lynn Wood because he is being persecuted. Now, what is it that makes me say that? Because I've done some investigation of the other people around who are being hailed as heroes or heroines and who might not be. So we are living in a stage now where not only is the consent manufactured, but the dissent is also manufactured. And let me just conclude with this. There's some longtime activists who looked at what was happening. You see, we all studied COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. I've read almost all of the pages of the Frank Church report, all of those different volumes, those thousands of pages. I've read those pages. I know that there is nothing that individuals who usurp political position and will use that authority for themselves at any cost. There is no price that they are not willing to pay to remain in power. That's one of the things that we must understand, who's telling us the truth and who is not. And that discernment will help us go a long way toward taking our country back.
Fascinating. And that's it's a critical, but sometimes challenging skill to acquire and build. But I've heard that a number of times, and some of the best people that I've found have developed a very good ability to discern truth and also to discern falsehood
Yes,
when
yes.
they run across it. So thank you for that. Let's see. You talked a bit about your book. Where is it available? If you could share that.
It's available on Amazon. And for those who don't like to go to Amazon, it's available at Barnes and Noble, and it's available at Clarity Press.
Okay. Well, that's great. You know, time has gone by faster than perhaps we would have preferred, but I find the topics we've covered are fascinating. They're super important. I bet we could spend, you know, another hour and a half talking about outgrowths of all of these issues. We'd like to have you on again at some point in the future. Very much appreciate your input, your perspectives, your insights. And we will look forward to talking with you again at some point in the not distant future. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for having me on.
You bet. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye-bye.